Before you look away, subscribe, like, and comment now, because once this door closes, there's no turning back. The alarm screamed to the concrete corridors at 2:17 a.m., sharp and metallic, the kind of sound that rattled bones. In Unit K, a place designed to erase time and hope, officers sprinted past steel doors stamped with numbers instead of names. A red light flashed above cell 14. Inside, a man had stopped responding. No shouting, no banging, just silence, thick, unnatural silence. After 23 hours alone, when they cracked the slot and peered in, the beam of a torch cut across a cell no bigger than a parking space. The prisoner sat on the floor, back against the wall, wrists loose at his sides. His eyes were open. His mouth was frozen in a half-formed word. On the wall behind him, scratched deep into the concrete with something sharp, were 4 words that didn't belong to him. I did what you said. Australia's Supermax isolation units were built for men like this, high-risk inmates, gang leaders, informants, and those the system couldn't control. 23 hours a day alone. 1 hour in a concrete yard under a sky that felt miles away. No human touch. No conversation. The official story was safety. The unofficial one was pressure. Break them down. Make them talk. Detective Sergeant Hannah Crow arrived before dawn. She had seen prison deaths before, overdoses smuggled in by corrupted hands. Staged suicides meant to end a debt. But this was different. There were no ligature marks. No pills. No obvious injuries. The medical officer whispered a word that made everyone uneasy. Stress-induced cardiac arrest. A heart stopped by fear, isolation, or something worse. The dead man was Liam Mercer, 32, former logistics runner for a Melbourne crime syndicate with ties reaching into Europe. He'd been moved to Supermax 6 weeks earlier after requesting protective custody. Officially, he was a management risk. Unofficially, he was talking. Crow walked the cell slowly, cataloging details the way she always did. The bed bolted to the wall. The stainless steel toilet. The camera in the corner, red light steady. She knelt to examine the scratches on the wall. The letters were jagged, frantic. Whoever wrote them had been in a hurry, or terrified. Check the footage, she said. The control room. Supervisor hesitated. There's a gap. How long? 23 minutes. In a place where every second was logged, 23 minutes might as well have been an eternity. Crow's mind raced. Supermax didn't allow mistakes. Doors were electronic. Movements were tracked. If something had happened to Mercer, it didn't happen by accident. It happened because someone wanted it to. She pulled Mercer's file. His last visitor wasn't a lawyer or a family member. It was a prison psychologist, Dr. Alistair Voss, assigned to evaluate high-risk inmates for compliance readiness. Voss had a reputation, brilliant, clinical, and deeply trusted by corrections. His reports carried weight in parole hearings and transfer decisions. According to the log, Voss had met Mercer 3 times in the past week. Each session lasted exactly 20 minutes. Each ended with Mercer requesting more time. Each request was denied. Crow interviewed the officers on duty. They spoke in rehearsed phrases. Procedures followed. Protocols intact. No anomalies. But when she asked about Mercer's behavior that night, one guard shifted his weight. He asked for paper. The guard said he needed to write something important. Did he get it? No. Crow felt a familiar tightening in her chest. The instinct that told her the truth was hiding in plain sight. She requested the audio from Mercer's last psychological session. The file arrived with notes stamped restricted. The recording crackled to life. Mercer's voice sounded thinner than expected, stretched by isolation. Voss's voice was calm, almost soothing. You want this to end, Liam? Voss asked. Yes, Mercer replied. I'll do anything. A pause. The sound of a chair moving. Anything, Voss repeated. The recording cut out. Crow sat back, staring at the waveform frozen on her screen. In isolation units, words mattered, promises mattered, and manipulation could be lethal. She dug deeper into Mercer's past. He wasn't just a runner. He'd handled communications, encrypted messages, drop locations, payments. He knew names, European names, names tied to an unsolved execution in Sydney's west, and a missing accountant who had vanished after boarding a flight to Berlin. At 11:43 a.m., Crow received a call from Internal Affairs. They reviewed the camera logs. The 23-minute gap wasn't a malfunction. It was a manual override, authorized by someone with top-level clearance. Who signed it? Crow asked. There was a pause on the line. Too long. It was approved under medical access. The voice said carefully, Dr. Voss's credentials. Crow stood, heart pounding. A psychologist didn't need camera blind spots. Not unless he wanted privacy. Not unless he wanted deniability. She returned to Unit K with a warrant. Officers unlocked Cell 14 again. The door groaning opened like it remembered what had happened. Crow scanned the walls one last time. Her eyes caught something she'd missed earlier. Tiny flecks of dried blood near the vent. Not enough for an assault. Just enough for a message. She reached into the vent with gloved fingers and pulled out a folded scrap of fabric, torn from a prison-issued shirt, written in pencil. Faint but legible were coordinates and a time. And beneath them, a warning. If I die, it's not me talking. Crow's phone buzzed. An alert from corrections flashed across the screen. Dr. Alistair Voss has failed to report for duty. She looked back at the cell, at the scratch confession on the wall, at the space where a man had died alone. Whatever Mercer had done, he'd done it under instruction, and whoever gave those instructions had just disappeared. By the time the sun dipped behind the razor wire, Dr. Alistair Voss had become a ghost. Detective Sergeant Hannah Crow stood in the car park outside the Supermax facility, phone pressed her ear, listening as every database she had access to returned the same answer. No recent transactions, no travel bookings, no CCTV hits beyond the prison gates. Voss hadn't fled in a hurry. He had planned this absence carefully, leaving behind nothing that could be traced in the usual ways. Inside the administration wing, Internal Affairs combed through his office. It was immaculate, too immaculate. No personal photos, no notebooks, just shelves of psychology textbooks and a locked filing cabinet bolted to the wall. When Crow ordered it opened, the locksmith shook his head. Military grade, he said. Someone didn't want this open fast. That was the first sign that this wasn't just a prison death. It was an operation. Crow returned to her desk and spread out the evidence she had. Mercer's final message, the camera override, the restricted audio cut mid-sentence. She played the recording again, listening not just to the words but to the pauses between them. Voss wasn't interrogating Mercer. He was conditioning him, leading him towards something that sounded like consent. Her phone vibrated. A text from an unknown number. Stop digging. You're standing too close to the edge. Crow stared at the screen, pulse quickening. The number vanished when she tried to call it back. Within the hour, the warden called an emergency briefing. Another inmate in isolation, Cell 22, had attempted suicide. The man survived barely. When Crow arrived at the medical wing, he was strapped to a bed, eyes darting wildly. He keeps asking if it's over, the nurse whispered. If he's done what they wanted. Crow leaned in close. Who's they? The inmate swallowed hard. The doctor, he said. He said if I cooperated, the walls would stop closing in. What did he ask you to do? The inmate's breathing quickened. Write things. Say things on camera. Confess to stuff that wasn't mine. Crow felt the pieces shifting into place. This wasn't about extracting information. It was about manufacturing it. Back in the control room, technicians finally cracked the backup audio from Voss's sessions. What they heard chilled everyone present. Voss spoke in precise, methodical language, guiding inmates through imagined scenarios. Confessions rehearsed until they sounded real, motives suggested, and repeated until they stuck. You don't need to remember it, Voss said in one recording. Just accept that it happened. The system will do the rest. Crow realized the horrifying implication. Confessions obtained in isolation, shaped under psychological pressure, could be used to close cold cases, redirect blame, and protect the real architect of crime. And Mercer must have realized too late that he was being turned into a tool. At 9:12 p.m., Crow received confirmation that made her blood run cold. One of Mercer's alleged confessions, never formally recorded, matched details from a 10-year-old European arms trafficking case that had recently been reopened. The suspect named in the new documents was already dead. Someone was cleaning house. Crow pushed for a warrant to search Voss's private residence. The place was stripped bare, furniture gone, walls wiped, but in the basement, behind a false panel, they found a portable hard drive wrapped in plastic. The files inside were meticulously organized: psychological profiles, risk assessments, and a folder labeled transfers. Each file contained an inmate's name, isolation duration, and a projected compliance window. Next to several names was a single word: complete. Mercer's name sat at the top, highlighted in red. At the bottom of the list were 2 new entries. One was the inmate from cell 22. The other was circled heavily. Crow, H, observer phase. Her stomach tightened. Before she could react, alarms blared again. This time not from the prison, but from her own phone. A security alert from her apartment complex. Unauthorized entry. Crow raced across the city, sirens cutting through traffic. When she arrived, her front door was ajar. Inside, nothing appeared stolen. No ransacking. Just one thing placed carefully on her kitchen table: a prison-issued pencil, carved into its side with the same jagged letters she'd seen on Mercer's cell wall. I did what you said. Her phone buzzed again. Another message from the same unknown number. Isolation works. You should know you're already in it. Crow stepped back, heart pounding. Whoever Voss was working for knew her movements, her access, her fears. And they weren't done. As she stood there, the news broke on television in the background. Authorities had announced the closure of 2 major cold cases, both solved by posthumous confessions from inmates who had spent months in isolation. Crow realized the truth was bigger than a missing psychologist or a dead inmate. It was a system exploiting silence, weaponizing loneliness, and rewriting justice from shadows. And somewhere out there, Dr. Alistair Voss was still watching, waiting for the next phase to begin. The night they moved Hannah Crow into protective isolation, she understood the true meaning of the word. Not a safe house, not armed guards, a quiet transfer buried in paperwork, signed off as temporary administrative containment. The same language used on the men she'd been investigating. 23 hours alone, 1 hour monitored, no visitors, no external communication beyond approved channels. They said it was for her protection. She knew better. The isolation unit wasn't inside a prison, but it felt identical. White walls, reinforced door, camera in the corner humming softly. Crow sat on a narrow bed, listening to the sound of her own breathing, suddenly aware of how silence could press inward. This was a final lesson. This was how it worked. On the 2nd day, she stopped sleeping. On the 3rd, she noticed the questions creeping in. Had Mercer really been innocent? Had the other inmates exaggerated? The mind searched for relief, for certainty, for someone to trust. That was a trap. Then, on the 4th day, the screen on the wall flickered to life. No warning, no knock. Dr. Alistair Voss appeared, seated calmly in a dim room. He looked thinner than his file photos, older but composed. "You shouldn't be here," Crow said, her voice steady despite the rush in her chest. Voss smiled faintly. "Neither should you, but isolation has a way of expanding. You killed Mercer." "I gave him a choice," Voss replied. "The same one everyone gets, eventually. Speak the truth that's needed, or disappear into irrelevance." Crow leaned forward. "You manufacture confessions. You broke people." "I refine narratives," Voss said evenly. "Governments don't want uncertainty, detective. They want closure. Markets want stability. Voters want villains with names. I simply provided the psychological framework to deliver that." Crow felt the weight of it settle. "You drove him to death." Voss's eyes hardened. Mercer panicked. He realized too late that his cooperation wasn't about redemption. It was about alignment. He tried to warn you. That was unfortunate. The feed cut abruptly. Minutes later, an officer arrived with documents, a formal review, allegations of procedural misconduct, leaked evidence. Unauthorized access. Her signature, perfectly forged, sat at the bottom of every page. They weren't isolating her to protect her. They were erasing her. Crow requested one phone call. Denied. She requested legal counsel. Delayed. The system moved with the same cold efficiency she'd seen applied to inmates for years. Then, in the quiet hours before dawn, she heard it. 3 slow taps on the wall. Not random. Intentional. Crow pressed her ear closer. Another tap. Then 2. She smiled grimly. Voss had taught his subjects patterns. He'd underestimated one thing. Investigators listened. Crow scratched lightly beneath the bed frame, peeling back a strip of insulation. Inside was a thin data chip taped carefully in place. Mercer's coordinates. The time. She finally understood. Before his death, Mercer had time to schedule maintenance drop, a moment when systems briefly synchronized. He'd hidden the evidence not outside the prison, but inside the process itself. Crow waited. At exactly 3:17 a.m., the unit lights dimmed for routine power cycling. The camera blinked red, then green. 7 seconds. That was all she needed. She slid the chip into the terminal beneath the screen. Files flooded the display. Raw session footage, unedited transcripts, authorization chains. Names appeared. Not just Voss, but judges, prosecutors, private security firms, international liaisons. A machine built on silence and compliance. And one final file, time-stamped hours before Mercer's death. A video. Mercer stared into the camera, eyes hollow but clear. "If you're seeing this," he said, "it means I didn't make it. They told me to confess to things that would close cases, to make ghosts convenient. I refused at first. Then they showed me how long forever feels." He swallowed. "They said my death would look natural. They were right, but they didn't know you were listening." The lights snapped back on. Alarms erupted, not in the unit, but across the network. Crow smiled as officers rushed in. Too late. The files were already transmitting, mirrored to servers she'd embedded weeks earlier, back when this was still just a suspicion. By noon, the story broke worldwide. An independent inquiry. Arrests. Sealed indictments. Dr. Alistair Voss was detained attempting to cross a private airstrip outside Perth, carrying multiple passports, and no plausible explanation left. The official statement called it a failure of oversight. Crow called it what it was, weaponized isolation. Weeks later, she stood outside the facility where it had begun, watching the gates close for the last time. The isolation program was suspended. Reviews promised. Reforms announced. But Crow knew better. Systems didn't disappear. They adapted. As she walked away, her phone vibrated with a single message from an unknown number, one she'd never seen before. "You survived." Most don't. She deleted it without replying. Because some stories don't end when the doors open. They wait. And if you think this one was intense, you're not ready for the next. Subscribe, and don't miss what's still buried in the dark.